My name is Diego Silva HERRAN from the National Institute for Environmental Studies of Japan, and I'm glad to chair this session today, the first of 3 sessions related to national scenarios. And in this session, we are going to have 5 presentations, mostly about Asian countries. So we hope that after this session, we get to know more about how is the situation in this part of the world in terms of decarbonization. And we're touching upon different aspects. Let's get started. So our first presentation is by Dr. Junling from the Harbin Institute of Technology. And she's going to introduce to us the presentation about the transition pathway for China to reach the 2060 carbon neutrality target. So the floor is yours.
Hi everyone. So it's a night from Beijing. Today is very happy to give an introduction about the piece of study we've done on China about its transition pathway to reach the 2060 carbon neutrality target. And this work is collaborated with other 2 colleagues from Tsinghua University in Mingjian, and also from the Renmin University of China, Omkar. Okay, so since the last year, September, China has announced a series of new climate targets, including the most important, the long-term carbon neutrality target by before 2060, and also a series of new targets related to the 2030. Which also refers to the updated NDC. So compared with the previous NDC target, so many target has been revised and more ambitious has been raised. Like the peaking time has been moved to before 2030, and also the carbon emission intensity has been increased. From the range of 60% to 65% to over 65%, and also the non-fossil fuel share to increase from the 20% to 25%. And also China has, for the first time, has announced its target for the wind and solar power capacity. So all these new policies and targets indicated that China need to have to take more rapid action and more ambitious policies to realize. So this raises the question is that how China should transfer its emission pathway. And since the announcement of the policy, so actually the government has the carbon neutrality target and also the CO2 peaking target has been one of China's development strategy for now, and the central government is taking it very seriously and to make sure and is developing a policy system which is called 1+N, and to make sure that the policy can be realized. And this policy system is made of 1 for the top level design, and a series of N policies will be developed to design the detailed roadmap and the time frame to realize the climate targets. And for now, several very important measures and even some measures that have never been raised before have been proposed, like to support the local levels, different stakeholders like the key industries and the provinces and cities. So to take lead in carbon dioxide peaking, and also for the first time announced that the government will put strict control on the coal-fired power plant capacity, and also on the dual high project. So, and also the government has promoted the earlier promote plans to reach the earlier peaking in key industries like the iron, steel, non-ferrous and non-ferrous industries, cement, and etc. So you can see that the government is very detrimental to make sure that the climate targets would be realized. And however, so since China is still the largest developing country, and so when we are doing the analysis for the transition pathway, the current development status should be taken into account. So first of all, China is still in the urbanization process. So for now, the urbanization rate is a bit less than 64%, and which means that if we wanted to realize the urbanization rate like the developed economy in the long term, which means that around 150 million rural population will migrate to the urban areas. And consider the energy consumption level gap between the urban and rural residents, and so the energy consumption will be expected to grow in the future. And also the urbanization process will act as a factor, a driving factor for the infrastructure construction, which means that there will be continuous demand, continuous growth, continual output from the key industrial products like the iron, steel, cement. So as you can see that from the figure on the right, the cement and the iron steel products, the crude steel products has been steadily growing in the last few years. So so under the urbanization process, so this it is expected that the output of the key industry products will remain at a relatively high level, and it will not decline very fast. And also, and with the people's income grow, that the demand for the consuming goods, especially like the vehicle, will keep growing. So currently, the vehicle population, the vehicle ownership per 1,000 population in China is relatively low compared to the developed economy. So in the future, so the vehicle population will continue to grow very fast, and also it will act as a driving factor for the material demands such as the aluminum. And on the other side, another very important fact is about the energy endowment, which is the dominating role of the coal in China. So although in the past 10 years, China has made a big progress in decreasing the coal consumption, which the share of the coal in total primary energy has been decreased a lot, but currently it still accounts for more than half of total energy consumption. And we also have a very high import dependence on the natural gas and oil, which means that coal still plays a very important role in terms of the energy securing the energy security in China. And in this year, China has just faced a very severe shortage of power supply, which is also related to the global price swings. And in this case, the government has expanded the coal mining and extraction plan, and which means that this year the coal consumption will rise, and also the CO2 emissions will rise as well. So and on the other side, if we look at the coal consumption structure in China, we see that around half of the coal is consumed by the power sector. However, for the power sector, with the average lifetime of the current power plant, the fleet is only like around 12 years, so which are very young. So which means that they will keep operating for quite a long time, for several decades, at least like around 2 decades. And in 2020, before the announcement of the announcement of the carbon neutrality target, and China has seen that a large amount of new coal power plant has been approved. So which means that in the next 5 years, in the 14th 5 years before 2025, the CO2 emissions from the coal power plant is very difficult to see that it will decrease in this period. Okay, so for this analysis, we apply a model which is called the PATANGE, and this model is developed based on the LEAP platform. And in our model, we have very detailed representation for China's energy system. So and for the as I mentioned earlier, that we for the industry output the energy surface demand for the industrial output. So we have connect the demand from the industry and from the transport and the building sector and to connect the sector with the industry sector, so that we can see that how the demand from these final sectors will drive the output of the industrial products. And also we have very detailed structure for for each sector. Like for the building sector, we have separate modeling for the cooling for the urban heating sector, and also we separate the model for the urban residents and the rural residents, and also very detailed representation for the transport sector. And the base year of our model is 2015. But we have updated our key energy indicators based on the national statistics to 2019, and we have a detailed technologies included. A total number of 465 types of technologies are included, and in addition to the energy sector, we also include the industrial process and the local scale CO2 emissions. So for the pathway, in the business as usual scenario, we see that CO2 emissions will not peak until 2040, and after that, the CO2 emissions will remain like a plateau and will not decrease very fast. So this is driven by the decline of the output of industry products, and this is related to the slower rate of the urbanization process. And then for the net zero, we have two net zero scenarios for these scenarios, since for the 2060 carbon neutrality target, it refers to all the greenhouse gas emissions. And we have looked at the literatures and taking into account the non-CO2 emissions contribution. So we look into the literature, and we took the 2050 as the time for the CO2 emission to meet the net zero target. And in this target, there were actually two pathway to reach that goal. One is that to peak around 2025. As I mentioned, that it will be very difficult for China to peak earlier than that period, because the coal consumption is expected to grow in this period, and especially for the power sector. And another pathway is that we peak by 2030. And in this the two scenarios, we can see that although they reach the net zero at the exact same time, but actually they have different implications for the accumulated CO2 emissions. And you can see that in the late peaking scenario, so total CO2 emissions will be higher by about 31 gigaton, which is equivalent to 3 times of current annual emissions. So in this regard, actually we took a deep investigation into the 2025 scenario pathway. So the first question is how to make sure that China could peak its CO2 emissions by 2025. And the most important thing is to slow the CO2 emissions and make it to reach the plateau as soon as possible. And the most important thing is to decrease the coal consumption. So from the pathway, we see that we should keep decreasing the share of coal in total energy consumption. And from the 2020 to 25, we should just follow the pace of the last 5 years. And we see that the CO2, the coal share in total energy demand will decrease at the same pace as in the last 5 years. And how this happened? So actually, it is from the reduction in the industry sector, because for the power sector, the coal consumption will keep increasing for the next 5 years due to new capacity will be added in the period. So for the industry, so it is very important to make sure that industry sector and the coal consumption in this sector will be decreased. So strict control should be put on this sector. And so the CO2 emissions, in this way, CO2 emissions is possible to see that it could peak in around 2025. And we see that in this period, other sectors like the building and transport sector, the CO2 emissions is possible to stay to remain at current level or have a little bit growth. And
1 minute left. 1 minute.
Sorry.
1 minute left.
I mean, okay, I'll be very quick. Okay, so for the different sectors, we see that the industry and the building sector, they will be the first sectors to peak and to peak in around 2020. And for the power sector and transport sector, they will peak before 2025, so that the nationals will be able to peak before the 2025. And see that in the long term, the power sector will have a rapid decrease in CO2 emissions, and by 2050, it will become a negative emissions, so that it could offset the emissions from other sectors and to realize the net zero CO2 emissions for the whole country. And then we look at the different sectors for the industry sector, as though that the output of the industry products will continue to grow in the before the midterm, but still we need to put a very strict control and to make sure that CO2 emissions will be reduced in these sectors. And the most important measures, the first measure is to continue to improve the energy efficiency, and then is to for the short term is to increase the electrification, to use the electrification to substitute the coal and gas emissions in the industry sector. And in the long term, we should adjust the production structure, like we promote the electric arc furnace in the production, and also we introduce the hydrogen to replace to be used as a fuel and also as a fossil fuel in the industry sector. And then the rest coal consumption, the CO2 emissions will be captured by the CCS. So in the long term, the electrification rate in the industry sector is expected to reach 63%. And for the building sector, similarly, the very important measure is to keep increasing the electrification rate. So in the long term, it will reach the 75%. And first of all, it should substitute the gas consumption and coal consumption in all sectors, like the resident buildings should realize the fully electrified. And then for the heating sector, which accounts for the largest part of the CO2 emissions currently. So the most thing, another very important thing is to keep increasing the energy efficiency of the building. So currently, the government is working on the net zero CO2 emission building standard, and also is promoting like the ultra low energy consumption pilot project in China. So this will lay a very good foundation for this sector to reduce its CO2 emissions. And for the transport sector, with the technology of electric vehicles and hydrogen and also biofuels, it is possible for the road sector to be fully decarbonized in the long term. And the navigation and aviation are sectors that are difficult to be fully decarbonized. So the fuel switch is the most important measure for the transport sector. So in the long term, we can see that the passenger vehicle and the public transport could be fully electrified, and the hydrogen will be applied in the truck, applied in the truck sector, and also for the biofuel will be applied in the navigation and aviation. So for the power sector, the coal capacity unabated coal power plant will be phased out when they reach the end of their lifetime. So in China, the average operating lifetime of coal power plant is about 30 years. So which means that around 2050, so the coal power plant could be phased out, and then simultaneously the wind and the power plant will develop develop very fast. And in the long term, so the total capacity of the wind and solar will be like 10 more times of current level. And also the CCS will be utilized especially to combine with the biomass, to make sure that this sector will produce negative emissions.
Can you please wrap up, please?
Okay, yes, so just last slide. So energy structure, so in this scenario, we see that the 2030, there is a fundamental change in the energy structure, and we see that the 2030, the non-fossil fuel share actually will largely exceed the target. And for the long term, the non-fossil fuel ratio will reach 85%. And for the investment requirement, we see that the total amount of annual investment will peak in around 2040, which is around 4 trillion. And then the supply side will take a more dominating proportion in the total investment. Okay, so yeah, so just a last slide is that this piece of work is actually a part of the effort that to explore China's carbon neutrality pathway. And in addition to my analysis, there are several other contributions from the global and the domestic modeling groups. And each year we will focus on different topics of China, and this year will be the electrification. So yeah, so this report will be published in next month. So yeah, thank you for and thank you for watching, and hope you and any questions are welcome.
Now I would like to call for our second presentation is by Katsuya Sasaki from Kyoto University about the distributional impact of carbon taxes on household consumption in Japan. So please, Katsuya, share your screen.
So hi, I'm Katsuya Sasaki from Kyoto University in Japan. It's about 10 o'clock p.m. in Japan. So I start my presentation with the title, Distributional Impact of Carbon Taxes on Household Consumption in Japan. Now let's begin with the backgrounds and motivation of my research. Well, in 2015, the Paris Agreement was established, and it requests all the participating countries to significantly reduce greenhouse gas emission. And in this context, the attention to the carbon tax is highering as a deduction measure. And from this figure table, many countries is now introducing carbon tax, and especially in European countries. And however, the tax rate in Japan is much lower than those countries. And so to play an important role in international reduction measure, like the future NDC target in Japan, and also about the Paris Agreement climate target, the higher tax rates, so setting a higher carbon tax rate is very crucial to the ambitious climate target to fulfillment these targets. However, the concern is that the carbon tax has an uneven impact of to the country's households expenditure. So one era did a systematical study about this distribution effect of carbon tax, and in general, he said a carbon tax is regressive to income in developed countries, whereas they progressive in developing countries. And he said the main factor of this a regressive and progressive feature is, one is that the dependent resource for energy generation, and the second one is that the share of energy expenditure with income level. For example, about the first factor, even in the same developed countries, US, they represent the regressive feature, whereas the British Columbia in Canada represents a progressive feature, because in British Columbia in Canada largely rely on the hydropower, not fossil fuel. And about when it comes to the distribution effect in Japan, the Fujikawa and Sugino did this similar research, and they both calculate extra expenditures caused by a high carbon tax rate, and they show that the higher carbon tax rate could lead to the large burden on income a low-income household in Japan, like the same result in developed countries. But their research largely based on the calculation with the assumption that the expenditure on households is the same based on even after the price increase by carbon tax. So we have to include the household consumption change according to the price increase. And also we have to update the climate targets to the recent Paris Agreement. So by considering those limitations, we analyze the impact of a carbon tax on Japanese households by considering those two factors. The one is the changes in household consumption by response to climate price change, and also updating climate targets to Paris Agreement. Now about the methodology. In this research, we used a micro simulation model, AIM-5, and the whole structure is like here. But firstly, we firstly assume the income distribution, a log normal income distribution as our income, determined by a GDP per capita and a Gini coefficient. And also about the expenditure estimates part, we used AIDS demand system by using the national parameters estimated by the historical data, and also by the price change in the future calculated by AIM-HAB model, CD model. And also we used historical consumption data, and in this research, we newly added Japanese consumption data and updated the national parameters in AIDS. So AIDS is a very important part of our research. It enables the reflection of household consumption behavior change. And also, we, as a consumption category, we use a COI/COP, classification of individual consumption by purpose, as a commodity classification. And also, we measure the income, so we measure the distribution effect of carbon tax as equivalent variation, EV, representing this equation. So EV is a kind of the index that reflects the how much the one willing to pay for the introduced policy before implementing for example, the mitigation scenario. So if the EV value represents negative value, then that shows that the consumption level after implementing measuring a mitigation policy leads to the reduction of consumption level in the households. And as a scenario, we use SSP to base a baseline scenario as a benchmark, and also a well below 2 degree scenario correspond to the Paris Agreement 2 degree target as a target scenario, showing the emission pathway like here. And as a tax rate, we use the estimated tax rate, uniform carbon tax rate estimated by AIM-HAB, a recursive dynamic model, and like here, like in the table here. And from here, the tax rate in Japan in 2030 is about 30 times from the current Japanese carbon tax rate. And also we set it 2030 as a target year of our analysis. Now let's move to the result part. Firstly, I show the price change related to baseline scenario in 2030 in Japan. So from here, we see the prominent increase of price in the first one, furnishings, household equipment, and the maintenance category, and also housing, water, electricity, gas, and the fuels. From now, we use abbreviation like 3 alphabetical capital alphabets like FAT, HWE, and all these 10 categories into one, OTH. Second is about the equivalent variation ratio change in 2030 from baseline scenario. So from this figure, firstly, we can see that the regressive feature of carbon tax in Japan. So about 1.03% difference between the low income level, decile 1, and the higher income level in decile 10. And from this figure and from these different colors, we can see that there are neutral or progressive features in FHE and HWE, whereas there is a strong regression feature in the other categories in OTH. And about about the consumption change, we can see this regressivity and progressivity very strongly. So firstly, about the FHE and HWE, we can see the progressive feature. So that's the consumption, the reduction of consumption in lower income households, represented in the left side of this figure, is lower than that in higher income level. And in contrast, the consumption loss is higher in a lower income households than in higher income level in OTH households, represented in this dark purple color. And from these research results, we can see that the strong regression feature in Japanese high carbon tax rate just presented in the previous physical and Sugino researches. But at the same time, we can see the progressivity appears in the FHE and HWE categories. From these, and these HWE represent the direct energy consumption by households, and FHE is considered to represent the indirect energy consumption via manufactured products. So the questions are, firstly, why did this progressivity on these FHE and HWE categories appear? And then how did the household consumption pattern and its change lead to the final regressivity? Although the in FHE and HWE, the progressivity appears. To answer those questions, I thought two possible factors like this. The first one is that all households in Japan needs to consume a minimum level of energy for living. And the second one is that the lower income level people the cost of their consumption levels are to the minimum. By considering those two factors, we construct our theory to explain the results like this. Firstly, to implement the high carbon tax rate in Japan, the energy intensive commodities, the price of energy intensive commodities rise very significantly, and then households respond to this price change and try to reduce their consumption in this category. However, because lower income households are less flexible to adjust their consumption in this category, because they are already consuming the minimum level of living for their livings. So they have to reduce their consumptions to offset these impacts, and then it will cause the strong reduction in other consumption categories, and then leads to the final regressivity in Japanese households. So this is the conclusion. So in this research, we analyzed the distributional impact of carbon tax in Japan based on the two emission pathways and considering the household income and demand system by using the micro simulation model M5 that reflects household consumption behavior change. And the result is almost the same as the previous researches. That is, in Japan, the distribution effect is regressive into income. But we have a strong evidence that this regressivity caused because the low income households are less flexible to adapt to the higher carbon tax. Now, about the future direction, because we couldn't decompose the Japanese households into more detailed level like regional level and generation level, the next step is to distinguish these regional and generational differences into our 5 model and do the carbon tax assessment. And then because we use a rough category like FHEE, which included housing and energy both into one category. The next step is to further decompose these categories into more detailed ones, and then did the same calculation and show the what sector is more influential to the final regressivity. Okay, and this is a reference of my research. Thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you, Katsuya, for your interesting presentation. I think we have a couple of minutes for Q&A.
Oh, can I have a question?
Please go ahead.
Yes, I want to know that you may have a module taking care of the consumer's response to the price changes. I wonder whether these models consider multiple sectors as your results shows, or they have different sectors, different goods.
Sectors, so different consumption goods, right?
Different goods, yes, different products and services.
Yes, as I said in this presentation, we use 12 different consumption categories. So, and sorry, just a moment, please. Maybe your question is about this AIDA model, right? Sorry.
So yes, so these modules is also using input-output database, or
not we just used a household survey data, a household survey expenditure
but
data.
you harmonize the data.
Yes, right.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for asking.
Okay, thank you. I think you're just short of time, but if you have any other additional questions, please use the chat, and presenters can also follow up on that. So thank you very much once more, Katsuya. And now I would like to move to presentation number 3 by Dr. Jin Yu, who's going to talk about the assessment of strategies for reducing the carbon footprint of textile products in China under the Shared Socioeconomic Pathways framework. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. So my name is Jin Liu from Shanghai Jiao Tong University, and today I'm going to introduce a research framework tackling the product level decarbonization pathways, and we are going to use China's textile products as a case study. So the textile industry in China was the first industry to promote the industrial level zero carbon goal. And the textile industry itself has a long industrial chain, and it's widely linking various consumers and producers. But the long-term product level decarbonization pathways for textile products have not been done yet for China. So we are going to do that, and using we combine a life cycle assessment approach and MCT model to simulate SSP scenarios and climate policy scenarios through 2050. And we select 2 textile as study objects, cotton yarn and PET yarn, because they are the major emitting textiles, as this figure 1 shows. And this is the research framework. So we see the left-hand side, life cycle assessment will provide the emission inventory in the base year for activity level and emission factors. But for the future projections of activities and emission factors, we derive from IM models and SSP assumptions. So, for example, the power sector's decarbonization pathway is coming from MCG model, as well as the textile and chemical industrial decarbonization pathways. And for SSP assumptions, we export economic development, consumption habit, and industry, agriculture, and end-of-life treatment for the activity data. So, and we have simulated from year 2020 to 2050. And we have 3 climate policy scenarios and 5 SSPs. And then we finally will get results for current GHG performance and future greenhouse gas projections and mitigation strategy assessment and for policy recommendations. So the life cycle assessment will include 4 products and 3 stages. 4 products are cotton, fossil fuel-based PET, bio-based PET, and the recycled PET. And 3 stages are the raw material stage, processing stage, and end-of-life stage. And then we compile a consistent GHG emission data set. And so these emissions are calculated as per unit for each type of textile and for the forecasted total domestic demand. And the system boundary was to the finished yarn stage, but the subsequent stages of retail, reprocessing, and use and consumption are excluded. And for the SSP scenarios, this table shows the related parameter settings. It's include, for example, the waste treatment for, the waste volume for textile products and the preference for bio-based and the recycled PET products. And for cotton, we consider the agriculture's input, such as pesticide, fertilizer film, and energy input for the agriculture production and biofuel preference. And for the industrial processing stage, we consider the energy intensity and biofuel preference as well. And for end-of-life treatment, we consider the non-renewable rate and recycling rate. And we also consider the trade. And the climate policy scenarios are reflected by national carbon price. And we adopted these scenarios from a paper from EIL published in 2019. And here is the results. This figure, the left-hand side is the annual emissions for different scenarios. Different colors are the climate policies, and SFPs are reflected in the lines and within the different colors. And the right-hand side is the cumulative GHG emissions. So under the BAU, we see that social economic conditions will have a huge potential influence on the future GHG emissions. But a combination of socioeconomic measures and climate policies will reduce annual carbon emissions by 89% and cumulative emissions by 34.3% by 2050. This is a figure showing the breakdown of GHG by textile life cycle derived from different feedstock types in 2050. And A is BAU, B is in the middle is the NDC scenario, and C is a 2-degree. Sorry, I didn't explain this pathways, but you can see the NDC is the before 2030 we follow the China's NDC commitment, and after that we will rapidly decarbonize to be consistent of the global 2-degree goal. But the C figure shows the 2-degree pathways results. It means that we will decarbonize rapidly, more fast than China's NDC commitment, and the immediate emission reductions happen, and from 2030 to 2050, the emissions reduction will be less than NDC scenarios. So maybe in some results, NDC scenarios results in 2050 will have more drastic change in 2050. And so this breakdown results shows the bio-based feedstock and advanced processing is making bio-based PET the lowest carbon product in BAU. But in the climate policy scenarios, the climate policy effect will narrow the GHG emission gap between different products. And we also break down the emission reductions by different measures, including production growth and power decarbonization, energy conservation, and unified carbon price, and waste circulation, improve renewability, and biofuel replacement, low carbon agriculture, and preference for green products. Among all these measures, power decarbonization and energy conservation plays the most important roles in the cumulative GHG emission reductions. But you can see the red part. How many minutes?
1 minute.
Oh, sorry. The red part is the production output derived from IAM models. So SSP has a large consumption demand due to fast economic growth. But these effects will be offset by different measures. And so it means that decarbonization of the power sector is fundamental, and decarbonization, the power consumptions in the textile industry is important. And the changes in the attitudes assumed to occur under different socioeconomic conditions, but the consumption itself needs to be better taken care of in the modeling. So I want to say a few words about the future directions regarding the consumption to better model the future industrial products demand. It means to improve the modeling scheme. And I'm considering iteration between emission accounting, future projection, and a simplified general equilibrium model. And also another direction is to consider investment and innovation for future demand for low carbon products or services. It's either promote current low carbon industries or create new demands for new products and services. And it's important to simultaneously achievement of economic growth and sustainability. And also considering equality improvement is also another important issue to tackle the simultaneous achievement of economic growth and sustainability. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. Very interesting insight on the textile industry. But I have one short question about how do you treat how do you handle the disaggregation of consumption of textile products within the CGE model? Because usually textile industry is treated as a single sector, but you are handling 4 different products as far as I understood. So how was that disaggregation done?
I think the major modeling work is based on the forecasting based on the inventory analysis, inventory data in base year from LCA approach, and we forecast from that. And IM models are contributing decarbonization pathways for power sector and industry sector, including textile sector and chemical sector, because some intermediate input are coming from chemical sector. But
Okay.
they're contributing the emission factor change rate.
Okay, I understand now. So the accounting part is essential for this kind of analysis, right?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. Let's move to our next presentation. The next one is by Omkar PATANGE from the Indian Institute of Management of Ahmedabad. And he's going to introduce a study about mitigation strategies to bridge the gap between low carbon and net zero emissions in the energy system in India. So Omkar, the floor is yours, and please share your presentation.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. And thank you for this opportunity to present my work. So I'm Omkar from IIM Ahmedabad, and I'm currently a visiting scholar at YASA under the Engage Research Exchange, and my co-authors are Prasad Garg and Sarita Vishwanathan from IIM Ahmedabad and NIES. So this is part of my dissertation work, and I hope to get some feedback as well from you guys. So I'll discuss the mitigation strategies for net zero energy systems in India. So this is the brief outline. So let me just jump into. Okay, so just to motivate the discussion. So the energy sector in India contributes to more than 90% of the CO2 emissions and around 3/4 of the GHG emissions. And the Indian energy system is coal dependent. It is a fast growing economy, but we also have a very low per capita energy consumption and low emissions per capita. Now the NDCs take this into account, and I'm talking about the NDCs before the update in Glasgow. And the general approach to climate policy has been to keep the development priorities in mind. Now coming to this, this is based on the Kaya identity. So I have taken the data for some of the major economies. Some of them have announced a net zero target. Some are in the process or have already announced, and India now announced it for 2070. And you can see that the change that is happening in terms of the change in CO2 emissions per energy consumption, final energy consumption, that has already been negative for UK, US, Germany. And in case of India, it is still a positive growth. And that is why and one of the major factors, of course, is economic development, which is the income per capita. And keeping this context in mind, because I'll discuss the results in terms of the Kaya identity. So I just wanted to give this as the starting frame. So these are the research objectives. We first study the NDCs and other ongoing policies and develop the current policy scenario. And based on the current policy scenario, we analyze the difficult to decarbonize sectors in the CPS, the current policy scenario. And then based on that, we develop the net zero emission scenario. And we also develop some variants of the net zero scenario for different electricity mix. So these are the methods. I use the TIMES model, and I use the TIMES starter platform because I started building this model from scratch, and I wanted to get a starting point. So this is the general the modeling framework for my work. So the base year is 2015. I use the IEA 2015 energy balance, and the electricity load profiles come from the Power Ministry database. We have the demand drivers include population and urbanization and other demographic assumptions, which are based on UN population projections and other literature. The GDP growth rates we have assumed in three variants: the high, base, and low case, which vary between 6 to 8% of growth rate till 2030, and after that it varies around 4 to 5% for the remaining period up to 2050. The modeling horizon is 2015 to 2050, and the sectoral gross value added (GVA), which bifurcates the GDP, is divided between industry sector, services sector, and agriculture sector predominantly. The services could be further bifurcated into transport and other commercial services based on the available data. So we assume that the service-led growth continues and the share of services remain around 55 to 60% in India's GDP, and that is one of the driving factor in the economic growth. The sectoral demands then are estimated. We have 4 demand sectors: agriculture, the energy consumption in agriculture, of course, then transport, industry, and the building sector, which includes the commercial as well as the residential buildings. And the material demands for these are estimated, and based on that we estimate the energy demands. And then we use the current policy scenario based on the NDCs and current policies to analyze the current emissions and energy consumptions, and use the chi identity to then see the different drivers for these emissions, identify the difficult to decarbonize sectors, and then use it to analyze the net zero scenario. So this is the reference energy system. This is again, we can come back to this afterwards. So the demand sectors are, I'm still trying to flesh them out. So for example, the industries is currently divided between steel, cement, and other sectors. And I'm using the energy consumption directly and not going from material demands to energy demands in the model. So the material demands are determined outside the model, and then the energy consumption is determined based on different technologies and efficiencies of those technologies. For transport sector, we have the material demands as inputs, and these are converted into energy demands inside the model based on the technologies. Then cooking, lighting, space, conditioning or cooling and appliances form the building sector, and agri pumps and agri equipments, which include the tractors, which it include the agriculture consumption in energy. So these are the results for the current policy scenario. So as you can see, I'm calling this, so the NDC effect, you can see that the emissions start reducing, the percentage change goes towards zero, but it is not completely zero by 2050. And one of the major factors is still economic growth. So the per capita income rise is not countered by the reduction in emissions intensity and the energy intensity of GDP. So the emissions almost double between 2015 and 2050. And the cumulative emissions during this period are above 100 gigatons CO2. Now, to go into the difficult to decarbonize sectors, so this paper, Davis et al., it talks about the net zero energy systems, and it talks about 3 difficult to decarbonize sectors broadly: the reliable electricity supply, then road transport and aviation, long distance road transport and aviation, and the third one, of course, is industrial processes. Now, in these results, we see that effect. We see the similar effect where electricity sector, mostly for reliable electricity generation and supply, constitutes the major share in the difficult to decarbonize sectors. Then it is followed by steel and cement. And then in the transport, again, it is mainly the freight transport, long distance freight transport, which is dependent on diesel trucks. Another difficult to decarbonize sector that we realized was cooking in building sector, which as you know, currently there is a push for transition from traditional biomass fuel towards LPG and natural gas for cooking. And this transition is currently underway. There are, of course, behavioral and other barriers that are not letting the transition happen completely. But still, by 2050, we see a considerable share of urbanization and other factors driving this transition. And there will be a lot of LPG and natural gas usage for cooking. And then transitioning from there to electricity for cooking is again a difficult path. So there are various factors that currently restrict this transition. So we consider cooking as a difficult to decarbonize sector in this scenario. Then using this, then we go to each of these difficult to decarbonize sectors, and the main strategies for electrification of the demand sectors, and then decarbonization of the electricity sector wherever possible. And for the other fuels, then we look at alternate fuels like advanced biofuels and hydrogen for the other this thing, and also resource and consumption management. So sustainable consumption of steel, cement, and other energy intensive materials is one of the other strategies. So based on that, as I mentioned earlier, the electricity sector variants that we consider are they include various combinations of solar, wind, and battery storage, advanced nuclear technologies, and the use of coal and gas with CCUS. This is included because of the consideration that in case there is so the report on critical availability of critical minerals that drives the discussion around whether solar, wind, and battery storage we will have sufficient materials to fund to get that kind of deployment. And then nuclear is an option. The next generation nuclear technologies are options. But the other issue there is cost. So considering all this, we considered 4 different scenarios within the net zero scenario for electricity sector. And then
we have 1 minute left.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. So yeah. So then using this, we get the results in this manner. So we see the transition starts happening, and though we don't reach net zero, there are, and this mainly the transition starts because we stop deploying any coal power plants after 22 and start retiring the old coal power plants after 2040. So those are 2 main factors. And then again in the steels and cement sector, and the other industry sector, we start deploying alternate fuels. And this fuels the transition towards net zero energy systems. And as you can see, the GDP per capita, that is something which is not compromised with in the net zero scenario. Instead, the more reliance on reducing the emissions intensity of energy consumption is something that is used as a strategy. So this is one of the major features here that balances the development and climate policy. Again, one other factor is that the 4 variants that I discussed for electricity sector, they depend on CCUS at different levels. And currently in India, we don't have any carbon capture and storage plants. There are some carbon capture and utilization plants. So this is something which needs to be discussed with different policymakers and stakeholders to understand what is the exact potential. There has to be some geological surveys to understand the sequestration potential. So this is one of the aspects that we are putting forth. And then negative emissions, we have some potential for afforestation, reforestation, and soil carbon sequestration. But BECCS potential based on the bioenergy that is consumed within the energy system. So what we deploy in terms of biofuels and bioelectricity, that is very minimum in the current scenario. So we don't see much potential for BECCS in the net zero energy system scenario right now. So the main conclusions here are that. So one thing that this requires the transition from current policy to net zero, and I'll end with that argument, is that the current policies also have a lot of energy efficiency measures like the perform and achieve and trade, which is an energy efficiency regulation for the industry and power sector. And these, what we argue is that in a difficult to decarbonize sectors, when we deploy energy efficiency measures, they might act as impediments. So for instance, if we are incentivizing for efficient coal power plants or efficient blast furnaces, then that is not going to help to reach net zero emissions. So there has to, these schemes for energy efficiency have to be remodeled to make them schemes for carbon emissions, and the regulations, or even in terms of if it is a market-based mechanism, it has to come in terms of carbon rather than energy efficiency. So I'll end with that, and if there are any questions, we can.
Okay, thank you, Omkar, of your presentation. I think we have one person wanting to make a question. And Shivika, can you unmute yourself?
Thanks a lot for such a nice presentation. I just have two clarification questions. First is that when you mentioned that you have assumed some sort of a maximum growth rate on solar and wind or renewable, so is it like a maximum growth rate on capacity growth in India, or it's because of the market saturated growth, maximum growth rate of the renewable share in electricity sector? So what is the maximum growth?
The maximum growth here is in terms of capacity. So what I've assumed is that the growth rate that is currently going on from 2015 to 2020, that is something which will continue. And I assume a growth rate per year of, I think, around 20% for a certain period, and after that it starts reducing. So and then also the cumulative capacity that it reaches. So we had some like I did some consultations with some of the people, and they suggested that the cumulative the share of renewable capacity, that is solar and wind, in the total share cannot go above this for grid stability and other things. So based on that, I used some numbers, and this is something which I've used for the first electricity scenario, and then for the others I reduced that share, considering the availability of critical minerals and other things.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for the clarification. Yeah.
And now our last presentation of this session is by Nico Bauer from the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. He's going to introduce research on the 1.5-degree global climate target and China's carbon neutrality pledge. So the floor is yours.
So thank you very much. So last presentation of this session. I also want to thank Christoph Bertram, who is also present here, for supporting this work. And okay, this is just for repetition. So there's the carbon neutrality pledge by 2060, which is actually a greenhouse gas neutrality pledge, as it seems. The NDC is to have emissions peak before 2030. And there has been another study already by Duan et al. And we participated here with a Remind model. And the major outcome was that the 2060 carbon neutrality pledge is largely consistent with a 1.5-degree target within, so China within a larger global context. However, this paper was not so much focusing on the near-term policies, the 2030, and the NDCs, as have been estimated by a recent paper with various models. They are in this range to be expected, so the CO2 emissions per year. There is these other energy sector targets mentioned: carbon intensity, non-fossil energy share, and renewable capacity. However, there is also national targets. And this is primary energy use as a whole, the share of natural gas, and non-fossils in the electricity mix. For 2020, there has also been a import dependency target that was all published in 2017 already. Okay, the scenarios that we implement into the Remind model, global model, China, one region. We have a global carbon budget which equals about 450 gigatons CO2 over the century. This leads at the end of the century to a temperature change of 1.3 degrees. But however, we have an overshoot flexibility, so this temperature is overshot. the allocation of the national cumulative emissions is derived endogenously according to cost effectiveness, which leads to uniform marginal abatement costs. So what we do is we vary assumptions on a 2030 emissions and then look what does this mean in the global context for the Chinese emissions and the transitions. So we have the NDC scenario, where all governments globally followed NDCs until 2030 and then cost effectiveness afterwards. The cost effective scenario means all countries start immediately, consistent with their implied marginal abatement costs. Then we have two scenarios that are in between. These add to the NDC's additional sector policies, like good practice. This means the strongest national policy implemented worldwide is applied to all nations in the model. And then again, after 2030, cost effectiveness. Accelerated means we put even a little more on top of this. There is a huge table with all the assumptions that are included. I do not repeat it here. So it's a lot of sector policies. Energy efficiency and energy supply policies. Also land use policies. Okay, then we also vary the assumption on the injectivity of CO2 into the underground. This is the low CDR scenario. It is the same like the cost effectiveness, but we halved the potential to inject CO2 per year as a flow. Yeah, not the cumulative total, but the flow. Okay, now what are the results? When we compare the cost effective and the NDC 2030 scenario, we see there is mostly constant emissions implied until 2030 by the NDC scenario, whereas the cost-effective scenario requires steep emission reductions. There's a huge difference up until 2060, just about 100 gigatons of CO2. And these differences are not offset domestically, but it requires an international offsetting mechanism, yeah, to maintain the global carbon budget. More near-term reductions are possible as compared with the NDC, and you can see that already the good practice has a quite significant influence here. If we have less carbon dioxide removal potential available, then China would need to reduce emissions even further. In 2050, the CO2 price would be $270 per ton of CO2, which is quite a lot. And in this year, the NDC scenario has the same emissions, but a 50% higher CO2 price. So there is a difference which path you go. The difference, by the way, of the 1.5 and the well below 2 degrees scenario is not that large for China. I would show you in a second what why. To add also, so the other greenhouse gas emissions in 2060 would add 800 million tons of CO2 equivalent. Yeah? And greenhouse gas neutrality would be achieved in 2070. Here you see the cumulative emissions in China and the rest of the world. Here's the carbon budget, and here's the overshoot, so to say. The green dots mark 2060 results, and the black dots the 2100 end of century results. You can see if we would share emission budget by population, China would have this share here, but it requires international offsets to achieve this here, if we would assume a sharing according to population shares. With the grandfathering, that would relax the situation a little. What we also can see is So China would need international offsets, yeah, because it would not achieve this population share here, and it would not be able to offset domestically. Yeah, this is, so to say, the domestic net negative emissions, and if they would want to achieve the share with the equal population share, a carbon budget allocation, then they would need to do much more domestically on carbon dioxide removal and net negative emissions. But that is so much, it's hard to believe that is possible. So what's the difference between the NDC scenarios and those with more near-term emission reductions? So we can reduce by introducing the good practice policies globally the emissions by 5 gigatons, and 40% would be by China of these 5 gigatons. With the accelerated assumptions, that would add another 3.5 gigatons emission reductions, with nearly half of China. However, this levels off. This levels off. The step towards the additional step towards the cost effectiveness scenario would see another 9 gigatons CO2 emission reductions, but only 17% by China. Yeah, and when you go to the low CDR, that would lead to an even larger wedge. So this means that China has lots of low-hanging fruits for the first steps on top of their NDC, but then they run very strongly into bottlenecks with the near-term emission reductions. And this is exemplified by these shares here. Yeah. Okay, for the different sectors, you would need a very comprehensive policy regime, like a full carbon pricing regime, and then the emissions would need to decrease in all sectors, particularly energy supply and industry. You would also need to ramp up carbon dioxide removal in energy and industry. So if we now compare the targets, so we have here the NDCs and here these other national targets. In the NDC scenario, this very well fits with the scenario fits very well with the targets. Here the renewables are even lagging a little behind. With a non-fossil electricity share, it's only 40%. And that's interesting because these two, so there's some flexibility to tighten the emission reductions. And if the 50% target would be achieved, replacing coal electricity one by one, then the emissions could be reduced by about 1 gigaton in 2030 already, by only achieving this national target. What you also can see is the gas use would increase, and coal would rather stay relatively stable. However, if we now add additional policies, you can see that, for example, with the ramp up of the renewables, we are well within the limits of historical or the 2020 capacity additions. Yeah, and this is necessary in order to bring down the coal consumption. However, the cost effectiveness scenario is very, very ambitious, where you would reduce, for example, coal by 2030 by 2/3 compared to 2020. But here the growth of the renewable capacities, this is not so much beyond the observed capacity additions. So we go fast, and there might be some sticking points that rail us off the course, bring us off the track, and that is a very unpleasant thing. So what are the most important sticking points? The comprehensive national policy framework covering all the emissions with a strong initial kickstart of the mitigation policies. This is key for China. Energy sector transformation, so we would need a rapid coal phase out. This has impacts on employment. However, the coal mining sector is also pretty unproductive with a low extraction per worker, and the air pollution problem could also be solved. The renewables ramp up is well within what is observed. There's an integration challenge with increasing shares of renewables. The electrification of end-use sectors requires large changes in the industry sector. And we see a gas bridge. This requires some production ramp-up, also imports, and that might undermine the energy independency. However, the energy independency target was only for 2020. In this longer-term energy plan, there was no target for the 2030, as far as I have seen. Now, CDR potential. This is very important because the injectivity of CO2. So we inject about 1.8 gigatons of CO2 per year in 2060. This is multiple times the gas and oil extraction of China today. So that is really a huge industry, and China is not a small gas and oil producer, not at all. They rank 4th, 5th, and 6th, something in that range in international comparisons. What is also important is an international framework. So China has large residual emissions despite the low-hanging fruits, and it only has the limited CDR potential. The early mitigation options reduce the need for international offsets. So it not only has the national implications for the energy sector transformation, but also how strong and how tight the connections in the international regime need to be. China can also do a lot for the world because their research and innovation capacity is really large, and they can improve the national but also the international mitigative capacity. And improving the international mitigative capacity also reduces the burden on them. Okay, so the carbon neutrality is a hot topic in China, but the political situation is also fragile, and there is still a heterogeneous policy landscape. So I want to emphasize that this is only a few weeks ago that the guiding opinions on promoting the development of the West of China and forming a new pattern have been released, where they want to support coal, oil, and gas, and power transmission to the west, to the eastern part. Sorry, and this is not necessarily renewables that they have in mind. I have not found that explicitly mentioned. And also China has a lot of other important challenges like population aging, reform of the welfare state, and socioeconomic modernizations that all also need huge investments that might compete and trade off with low carbon investments. So it's difficult to see the decarbonization challenge as an isolated thing, because there's also these other huge challenges going on and that are becoming increasingly pressing. So however, we want to work on all of that, and in order to enjoy beautiful landscapes and have nice bicycle rides like that dude down here, and enjoy even the outlook with the glaciers, that they are not disappearing. So thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Nikio, for your presentation. Okay, Shibika, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, just one small question. Very nice presentation, and we are also getting the similar result when we had a stakeholder meeting with the Chinese ministry officials, and they are also optimistic that they will be able to achieve more than what they have committed in their few policy targets. So what you are saying, the early kick-ins in 2030, that is still possible. I just want to understand one part that you mentioned in your, I think so, last slide, conclusion one, the rapid phase out. When you are talking about rapid phase out, what is like, what year that you are focusing on rapid phase out in, before 2040, before 2030? So when you're talking about that rapid phase out, because they are not very optimistic, I should say, in that aspect. So they are expecting from what we got it from the stakeholder meeting, they're expecting that coal phase out will only come after 2045 or something like that. So that kind of a course correction kind of a thing, that, okay, if they're still relying in the initial years on the coal and then phasing out in the later part of, let's say, after 2040, what kind of whether it will change drastically or the other sectors will transform rapidly towards the decarbonization pathways?
Thank you for this question. The coal phase out is relatively quickly. I think we are phasing out coal 2040, 2045. I cannot exactly remember the date, but it is very quickly, and it is made possible in the cost effectiveness analysis, cost effective scenario, because there is a gas bridge. Yeah, if you assume that the growth of natural gas production and import is slow, and the reserve for gas is not growing that fast in China, then that would also open up some more space for coal. However, as you have seen, the CO2 price of more than $200 per ton of CO2 in 2050, this is a lot. Yeah, this would be multiple the price of a ton of coal. Yeah, and this makes coal very, very expensive to use. If gas is available, plentiful, and the gas market in China is developing rapidly, so they doubled their production in 10 years. The reserve tripled over the same time, and also the import capacity increased a lot for natural gas. So there's quite some prospect that over the coming years, gas really can make a more significant contribution to the energy supply in China. However, if this development stalls, then coal phase out would become much, much more difficult, for sure.
So, please correct me if my understanding is wrong. So the point is that you are saying that in the accelerated policies and also in NDC's scenario and the best practice scenario, gas as a transition fuel is very important in a general term in China to decarbonize and reach 2060, right?
It is important, basically, in all these scenarios. So I hope you see it. So the target, the national target for 2030 is 26.5 exajoule per year. So if you take the primary energy multiplied with 15%, the primary energy target multiplied with 15%, you get this number. And the cost effectiveness scenario is basically on track with this target, okay? The other scenarios here, they are even faster. And the low CDR scenario, where you have to reduce emissions even further, becomes very expensive, particularly because you have to reduce not only coal, but also that natural gas. And this is then where it really, really starts to hurt.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks for the clarification.
So if anyone has any more questions.
I have a question for Nico. Is it okay to ask now?
Sure.
I want to know the CDR option. CDR data in Remind model is coming from global database, or you collect data from China's?
What do you now mean with CDR in this context?
You mentioned something CO2 removal from fossil fuel mining sector.
I mean, you have the part where you capture the CO2. So this takes place in energy conversion and in the industry sector. So using solid biomass and gaseous biomass in order to fuel industrial processes. And these industrial processes you can separate and capture the CO2, like cement production, for example. You simply substitute the coal with the biomass. Simply, yeah. I mean, it's a technical challenge, sure, but it is possible. And then you have the injection part. If you have this concentrated CO2 stream. And the problem is that data on the capacity, the potential to inject CO2 is rather limited. It is diverse, so there's many different assessments, and they vary a lot. So there's very optimistic studies that come up with a cumulative potential of more than 3,000 gigaton of CO2, and some are more in the range or in the ballpark of 100. So that's quite a variation. And we decided to use a number of 370 gigatons of CO2 about. And that in our default case, 0.5% of this could be filled up per year. However, the data, the information that we have available is difficult to judge, because the geologists usually only assess the cumulative potential, not the annual. But the annual is more important for us. There has been a recent paper in Nature Climate Change, a perspectives paper that called for more research on the injection rate. Yeah, not the cumulative, not the total, but the injection rate per year. This is really the important part. Also, the study by Junling, I mean, she was even a little more careful with their assessment, if I saw correctly. I think you do not have more than 2 gigatons of CO2 injection, right?
Ah, I see. Thank you for sharing quite good insights. I have learned. Thank you.
Junling, can you say something on this injection potential?
Yeah, I don't have such kind of number at my hand right now, actually. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I mean, it would be really important to have better and more information on this. How much CO2 can be injected? That's per year. Not the total is gigantic. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the total is not the problem. It is the annual.
Yeah, actually, I have the result about the annual carbon sequestration. Mm-hmm. And in my scenario for the of the carbon neutrality scenario. So by 2060, the annual injection is about 1868 million tons. Yeah, so it's about 1.8 gigaton.
This is about what we also have. Excellent number.
Great to know
that. in the Duan paper, I think the variation is up to 6 gigatons per year.
So that's quite a lot.
That's quite a lot, yes. And that makes a huge difference. And the situation is relatively bad on that side of the parameter space. Our knowledge about the parameter is bad. Okay.
So how do you get the potential for the sequestration? So is it from the literature review?
Yes, there have been various reports, global, with regional disaggregation, but also more national studies. So the PNNL in Maryland, they looked for these source sink matching studies with detailed information on different storage sites. They arrive at this very high number of 3,000 gigatons. But there's not so much that they say about the annual potential. But I talked also with several geologists. They look at various regions in the world, and they say the situation on this parameter is really under-researched. We know a lot about the total cumulative, but not so much about the annual.